Good day, beautiful people, and welcome back to Life Treasures and Golden Moments. This is Natalie Silva. This month, I would like to share some true stories on the subject of hope. Do you ever hope for a miracle? What is hope really? It's a feeling or expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. Grounds for believing that something good might happen. Some examples of hope are, for example, you have a favorite football team and they win the game. There's a farmer hoping for rain because his crops are dry. Or a hope that a friend returns to good health after a serious bout with an illness. Someone once said, when you get to the end of your rope, tie a knot in it and hang on. It's a hope that helps us hang on in the face of disaster, like the raging storms moving in our direction, like the hurricane that just hit Florida. We hope it calms down to a whisper. And in defeat, when the game is in the other team's favor, and in the final moment your team scores and wins, they win the game. When someone's depressed, and a sign or a symbol or a person becomes present and gives one hope and inspiration to move forward in their journey in a positive new beginning. The stories that I am about to share with you today, I hope, will inspire you and reaffirm your faith and your spirit that there is always higher power that lets us know we are never alone. The first story I'm going to share with you today's author is Kelsey Tyler, and the title of the story is An Answer at the Truck Stop. David Hunter received a call just after 9 on a Saturday evening in 1986 while on patrol with the Sheriff's Department in Knox County, Tennessee. A woman was weeping loudly in the corner booth at the Raccoon Valley truck stop. Several patrons had grown concerned and contacted the Sheriff's Department. Hunter sighed and turned his patrol car in the direction of the truck stop. As a veteran officer of 8 years, he had seen so much pain in the lives of people that he could only imagine what might cause a woman to weep aloud in a truck stop. As he drove the remaining 3 miles, he remembered how pain was the reason he joined the police force in the first place. He had ridden along with a police officer one night as part of the research he had to do for a local newspaper story he was writing. The first call of the night involved a woman who had been badly beaten by her husband. Hunter watched as the officer handcuffed the man and led him away. He saw the relief in the woman's face, and suddenly something clicked. He might write 1,000 stories about good and evil in the course of a lifetime, but none of them could do for that woman what that police officer had just done. No story could rescue her from her pain. Hunter began seeking police work the next day, and never once looked back. Now, 8 years later, his love of his work was just as strong as it had been in the beginning. Despite the danger and frustration that came with the job, there were always nights like that one in which he could still make a difference for someone else in pain. Not sure what he would find, Hunter entered the truck stop cafe and immediately spotted the woman. Still weeping, her face covered with her hands, nearby sat 2 frightened little blonde girls, ages 4 and 5. Hunter's face softened as he approached the children. "What seems to be the matter, girls?" he asked them. The older child turned to look at him, and Hunter could see she had tears in her eyes, too. "Daddy left us," she said. "He put our stuff out of the car when we were in the bathroom." Hunter's heart sank. He studied the woman and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Then he looked at the girls and smiled a warm, comforting smile. "Well, now, is that so?" The children nodded. "In that case, I want you to climb on those stools over there and order something to eat." Reluctantly, the girls walked away from their mother and took separate stools along the counter. Hunter signaled the waitress and asked her to get the girls whatever they wanted to eat from the menu. With the children out of earshot, the officer sat down across from the woman. She looked up from her hands and stared sadly at Hunter, her eyes filled with heartbreak. "What's the problem?" Hunter asked quietly. "Just what my girl said," the woman replied, wiping her eyes. "My husband's, he's not cruel, just at the end of his rope. We're flat broke and he figured we'd get more help alone than if he stayed. I've been sitting here praying about what to do next, but I don't even have the money for a phone call. I just want to know God is listening, you know." Hunter nodded, his eyes gentle and empathetic, and silently he added his own prayer, asking God to show him a way to help this woman and her little children. He touched the gold St. Michael medallion he had always worn around his neck. Although most police officers didn't spend a great deal of time talking about religion, Hunter knew few who did not rely on their faith. Many officers wore the St. Michael medallion under their uniforms. Because the archangel was recognized as the patron saint of warriors, Hunter believed with all his heart that God had indeed used angels to protect him in the line of duty on more than one occasion. "She needs an angel about now, Lord," he prayed silently. "Please help her out." Hunter broke the silence between the woman and him. "Do you have a family?" "The nearest is in Chicago." Hunter thought a moment and then suggested several agencies that could help her. As they spoke, the waitress brought hot dogs and French fries to the children, and the officer stood up and he moved toward the counter. He took out his wallet to pay the bill. "The boss says no charge," the waitress said. "We know what's going on here." Hunter smiled at the woman and nodded his thanks. Then he stooped down to ask the girls how they liked their food. As he did, a trucker stood up from his table and approached the waitress. He mumbled something to her, and then she took him by the arm and led him to Hunter, the officer. It was unusual for a truck driver to approach Hunter on his own. Typically, truck drivers and police officers have something of a natural animosity for each other. Most truck drivers tend to see the police as cutting into their earnings by writing them tickets, while the police saw truckers as reckless people who placed their potential earnings before safety. The truth, of course, was somewhere in the middle. But still, Hunter couldn't remember a time when he'd been approached by a truck driver outside of the line of duty. The trucker wore jeans and a T-shirt and a baseball cap. He walked up to the counter and stood alongside Hunter. The officer noticed the normal buzz of conversation and activity had stilled, and the cafe was silent. Most of the patrons, nearly all of them long-distance truckers, were watching the conversation between the trucker and the officer. "Excuse me, officer," the man said. "Here." The trucker reached out his hand and gave the officer a fistful of bills. He cleared his throat. "We passed the hat. There ought to be enough to get the woman or girls started on their way." Back when he was a boy, Hunter had learned that cops don't cry, at least not in public. So he stood there, speechless, until the lump in his throat disappeared and he was able to speak. Then Hunter shook the man's hand firmly. "I'm sure she'll appreciate it," he said, his voice gruff from covering up his emotion. "Can I tell her your name?" The trucker raised his hands and backed away from the officer. "Nope. Just tell her it was from the folks with families of their own." Hunter nodded and thought of the fiercely loyal way in which people in Tennessee looked out for each other. When the trucker walked away, Hunter counted the money and was again amazed. A small room of truck drivers had, in a matter of minutes, raised $200, enough money for 3 bus tickets to Chicago and food along the way. The officer walked back to the booth and handed the money to the woman, at which point she began to sob again. "He heard," she whispered through her tears. "Ma'am?" Hunter looked confused, wondering who the woman was talking about. "Don't you see," she said, "I came here completely desperate and hopeless, and I sat in this booth and asked God to help us, to give us a sign that he still loved us and cared for us." Hunter felt chills along his arms and remembered his own prayer. how he had asked God to send help and provide this woman with angelic assistance. The truck drivers certainly didn't look like a textbook group of angels, but God had used them all the same. You know, ma'am, I think you're right. I think you really did hear. At that instant, a young couple entered the truck stop, saw the sobbing woman, approached her without hesitating. They introduced themselves and asked if they could help in any way. Well, the woman said, I could use a ride to the bus stop. See, I've got the money now, and I need to get to. Hunter stood up and walked discreetly away from the scene to a quiet corner of the truck stop where he radioed dispatch. The situation's resolved, he said. Then he walked toward his patrol car and climbed inside. When he was safely out of sight, he let the tears come, tears that assured him he would never forget what happened that night in the truck stop. As a patrol officer, he had almost always seen the worst in people around him. But that night, he'd been reminded that kindness and love do exist among men. And Hunter had learned something else. Sometimes God answers a prayer by using nothing more than a dozen big-hearted truckers sharing coffee at a truck stop in eastern Tennessee and playing the part of angels. What a beautiful story. The next story is called The Gift of the Angel Feather, and the author is Kate O'Reilly. It was in 1998, and I was in the emergency room with a diagnosis of pneumonia. All the drugs used to combat the illness were given to me, and I was sent home with strict instructions on the importance of bed rest and taking my many medications. When I left the hospital, I felt I should really be staying, but there were no available beds. It appeared that, because of my age and general health, I would recover quickly on a homebound regimen. Then, that evening, as I tossed and turned, being kept awake by the sound of the vaporizer, I finally fell into a very deep sleep at about 3:33 a.m. exactly. I was woken up by some presence in my room. At first, I thought one of the other sick members of my family was up moving about. When I turned over in bed, my heart began racing. There in my room were two very large bodies. As I focused my eyes, my mind kept saying, how could something this large fit into my bedroom? The two figures quickly made me understand without words that they were protecting me as I slept. I knew that they were angels. One of the angels was a male who stood about 10 feet tall, but how could a 10-foot tall figure fit in my room, which only had an 8-foot high ceiling? His robe was a very lovely blue-gray, and he had a loving face that felt healing to me. The other angel was all white. Her energy was soft and nurturing. She reminded me of the angels I read about as a small child, half feathers and half human. I reached out to touch them, and they were gone. I fell back into a restless sleep. In the morning, as I woke up, I began thinking about what had happened the night before, and I became very excited about the dream I'd had about the angels. When my daughter and granddaughter came in to see how I was feeling, I told them about my visitation by the angels. My daughter was old enough to be skeptical, but my 4-year-old granddaughter was awed and delighted by the story. After the excitement had passed, my daughter helped me out of bed to visit the restroom. At that moment, my granddaughter started screaming with excitement and glee. As I rose from my bed, a 6-inch long white feather came with me, stuck to my feverish leg. The three of us didn't know what to think. I was very confused because there were no feather products in our home due to allergies. My daughter was speechless, and my granddaughter was dancing with joy because the angel had left a gift. She said she knew the dream wasn't really a dream because angels visit people at night all the time. Of course it was an angel. I carefully removed the precious feather from my leg and put it on my bedroom altar. The next night I felt that I was getting sicker, not better. I decided that if I didn't feel better soon, I would call my doctor at 3:33 a.m. I was once again woken up by the feeling of a presence in my room. I turned over and there were the angels again. As I watched them standing across from me, the male angel asked if I was ready to go with them to heaven. In many ways, I was overjoyed to hear them speak and to invite me to join them. The angels said they were there to help me decide whether or not I would stay living in my body. I thought about the projects I was working on and about the unfinished business in my life. None of those things seemed very important, more than going with the angels. The love and contentment that they showed was so appealing, and I wanted more of it. All of a sudden, though, I thought of my 7 young grandchildren. All of my friends had said to me that they were here for a reason, and I could be a part of that reason. If I left with the angels at that moment, I wouldn't have a chance at least to say goodbye to the children and receive a final kiss and hug. I told the angels that I wanted to stay on the earth plane for now. The angels told me if I were choosing to stay, the only way I could remain alive was if I went back to the emergency room quickly. They soon disappeared as suddenly as they had come to me. As soon as possible, my oldest daughter took me to the hospital. As it turned out, the pneumonia had gotten much worse, and the doctor said that I had made it to the hospital just in time. The next morning at 3:33 a.m., I woke up hoping to see my angels, but they weren't there. I wondered if moving to the hospital had confused them. I was very sad to think that I might not see them again, and I wondered how I might bring them back to me. I realized I should have asked them more questions. I felt that I had missed an opportunity, and I questioned my decision not to go with them. I cried, feeling as if I were mourning friends that I'd had for years. My daughter and granddaughter came to visit me later that same morning. I hadn't talked any more about the angels since the morning of the feather. I was too weak, just focusing my energy on getting better. My daughter also had a lot on her mind, and I didn't want to burden or worry her. As we talked about my hospital experience, my daughter remembered something from earlier in the morning. She said she had woken up at about 3:33 a.m. and had gotten a strong feeling about an important decision she was trying to make. She was very puzzled by the fact she had received such an insight in the middle of a sound sleep. But now her mind was made up. After many months of struggle, she finally knew what to do. I smiled. My angels hadn't left after all. They were still with me and my loved ones. To this day, I cherish the gift of the angel feather. And the final story of today is called The Beautiful Flower, authored by Luann Hoslinger. I used to play alone in my grandmother's gardens. I could almost get lost among the climbing blue hollyhocks and the tall gladiolas. Even though I loved to play there, however, I always felt so alone. My mother died when I was 3, and my father didn't have much to do with me. Over the years, I was shuffled around between stepmothers, a grandmother, and even an orphanage. I was an only child. I had always wanted a sister. Throughout my childhood, I was woefully alone. I had always felt something missing, a void so deep, longing for a sister, but it was not to be. Playing in my grandmother's gardens, I used to imagine I had a sister as beautiful as a flower. Someone to walk to school with me, someone to read to me and play dolls with me. Still, I knew it wasn't real. I grew up, got married, and had a family. I worked hard and had a good life, and I was grateful. But sometimes in the quiet of the evening, as I was looking over the vast green openness and the multitude of twinkling stars above, I still felt a strange longing for that connection, the connection only found in a sister. I hoped that somewhere out there really was a person who could make me feel complete. But I guess God didn't really care about me all that much. One night I was out on the porch in the stillness of the waning day, rocking gently, working a needle through my embroidery, staring into the heavens. I felt that strange longing again. I was just about to go inside and get ready for bed when the phone rang. I dropped my sewing and moved inside. Hello? Hello, I hope I have the right number. This is the Springfield Police. Police? I asked, bracing for bad news. Springfield, Vermont was a town a few hours away where many of my relatives lived, and where I had gone to high school, but I hadn't been there in months. We have a letter here asking if we know the whereabouts of Luann Higgins, the voice continued. Higgins? That was my maiden name, but I hadn't used it in years. I fidgeted nervously with the canisters on the shelf. I'm Luann. What is this all about? I asked. It's from your sister, the police officer said. Sister? I sighed and shook my head. Was this just a cruel trick? I don't have any sister, I said at last. Well, ma'am, they left a telephone number for you, and they want you to respond. I had no idea what was going on, but I copied down the number anyway, and I read the last name I had been given. Manley. It meant nothing. The phone number was in Maine. I knew no one in Maine. It didn't make a lick of sense. This must be a joke. After 2 days of staring at that number on the slip of paper, however, I decided to call. One thought kept nagging at me. What if it was true? What if? It took me hours to work up the courage. I kept looking at the phone, and then I turned on my heels and walked away. Finally, I picked up the receiver. I'll let the phone ring 1 time. 2. This is ridiculous. I should hang up. 3, 4. Hello? Now what was I supposed to do? I stumbled all over my words. This is Luann. There was a total silence. Great, I've gone and made a darn fool of myself. This person has no idea what I'm talking about. Moments passed, then I heard a woman's voice, weak, almost a whisper. Luann? Oh, my Luann, it's you. I've been looking for you for 50 years. I couldn't grasp it. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are, I stammered. The voice on the phone tried to explain. I'm your sister. It had been so long no one had ever mentioned a sister. I had tried to wrap my mind around the idea. Oh, how I wanted a sister, but I almost couldn't let my heart hope that it could be true. How could I know for sure? I was 8 years old. My mother married your father, the woman explained. I remember the day you were born. You were so little. Mama and Daddy Bill didn't know if you'd even make it. The details of my birth weren't exactly normal. I was little. I had weighed only 1 pound. I had to sleep in a makeshift cradle under a light bulb for an extra warmth. I had been told that much. Well, why hadn't I been told about a sister? Why didn't I remember? I used to play with you and help take care of you. You were like a living doll after Mama died. We stayed with Grandmother, but one day I came home from school and you were gone. Daddy Bill had taken you away. I swore that someday I'd find you, and I've been looking for you ever since. My mind swirled. So my father had separated us, and I was too young to remember. All my life I'd felt an emptiness, longing for a sister. And all this time I had one, searching for me. And I never knew, as much as I clung to the wonderful revelation. It still felt like a dream. I needed to see her to be sure it was real. I still felt like a little girl pretending in my grandmother's garden. We arranged to meet right away. My sister offered to drive down from Maine and meet me at my home. That very weekend, I stood nervously on my porch as a dusty blued minivan pulled up in the driveway, and I clasped my arms around my chest, as if to keep myself from falling into a million little pieces. The van had barely come to a stop when a tall woman with thick brown hair jumped out of the door and ran toward me. My sister. Luann, she cried. She grabbed me and wrapped her arms around me, and I hugged her back. Sweet warm tears streaked my cheeks. Oh, thank you. Thank you, God. I waited a long time for that hug. We spent the whole day talking and staring at each other. I had her curly hair. She had my nose. I didn't know very much about her, but already I knew in my heart we were connected. We were sisters. Finally, I had that beautiful flower I had always dreamed of in my grandmother's gardens. My sister's name was Rose. When life is tough, hope sometimes sinks away from us. Without hope, we struggle to cope with disappointment, defeat, or uncertainty of the unknown futures. Fortunately, when we focus our thoughts and minds on God, we can soar above all of our problems and difficulties on the wings of hope, because hope comes from God, the creator and sustainer of our lives, the one who holds our future in his hands. A special thanks to all of our authors today for sharing their beautiful and heartfelt stories of God's divine touch. In closing, remember that hope is always there for each of us to keep our spirits up, a twinkling light that lets us know we are never alone. Until next time, take care and God bless. This is Natalie Silver with Life Treasures and Golden Moments.